Hey, and welcome to the Hypothalamic Amenorrhea podcast, an adulting advice podcast production. I'm Dani Sheriff, and this is the place to come if you care about getting your period regularly. This podcast aims to educate, inform, and keep you motivated on your period and HA recovery track. Let's dive in. And guys, please remember that I am not a doctor and nothing on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always seek the advice of your physician. Have you looked into the Healing HA 8-week program yet? If not, I've got your back. I'm going to fill you in on the details right now. It was created and it's ran by Sarah Liz King, who is a good friend of the show. And I'm really pumped to be promoting this for her because this is not a course that I have yet created. I run the HA Society at the moment, a community for women to come in, share their experiences, get support in weekly calls, get digital coaching throughout, but I do not have a specific structured 8-week program course. And just planting a seed, but I will share more about this later, I am creating a program for women who have recovered to ensure that recovery is not just happening but is permanent, and we have the skills and the tools that we need to make sure that we maintain a healthy period for the rest of our menstruating lives. So I was really excited when Sarah had this course out. I was like, you have to get some stuff together so that I can help you promote it, and she did. So it's an 8-week program. She goes over, why you got HA, how to put together a 5-step recovery program for you individually. There's one-on-one support throughout the 8 weeks if you need it for whatever questions that you have. There's weekly calls with the whole group. There's a Facebook group, if I didn't already say that. And there's workbooks. And so if you love like good structured stuff, she's got your back with this, which is really cool. She talks also about ensuring that you're eating enough, exercising, all that good stuff that you're curious about. She also dives into, the extra boost stuff. The extra boost stuff, sorry, I don't know what my words are today. Like alternative therapies, acupuncture, supplementation, and even like exercise strategies and stuff that you can do to give your body that extra boost throughout recovery. And her and I are really on the same page with like movement is healthy for you. It's just how can you ensure that you're moving in a way that is appropriate for your HA recovery. So I really like that she covers that module. This is just a super great course. I'm really psyched about it. So what I want for you guys, and this thing that I'm offering, I'm only offering to listeners of the podcast and women on my email list. So I'm not talking about this on social media. But if you go and join her program, I will give you a whole month free of the HA Society so that you can be in conjunction with doing the course, getting digital coaching from me, joining the community calls, listening to the early access episodes, attending the live practitioner events. So you're basically getting a lot more for just the price of the course. So all you have to do is go to healingha.thehasociety.com, and the links are in the show notes there. Buy the course using that link and send me your receipt, and I will set you up immediately inside of the HA Society. I'm the only one offering that, and it's only if you're listening. So make sure that you go and check it out. The course starts on March 29th. So I'm pretty sure she has limited spots. You're going to want to get in on that ASAP. And I can't wait to see you inside of the HA Society and check in on how it's going, answer any questions you have along the way while you're doing the course, and just help you get your period back. Okay, guys, let's go and meet our good friend, Abby.
Okay, fine.
All right, I've hit record. So,
awesome.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hypothalamic Amenorrhea podcast. I am here today with my, now I would consider very good friend, Abby. Abby, how are we saying your last name?
It's Vichill.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, no one gets it right. So
no, this whole time
bad.
I've been like, it's like some exotic Italian last name.
Vichill or
Vichill.
Vicheli.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it just, I mean, we've gotten some really good ones.
I love it. Okay, well, Abigail, she is super cool. She's a member of the society and has been a really good contributor just to encouraging people and showing up for other people and sharing her story along the way. She came in and did not have a period at the time, and then did some work and got one. And we're kind of going to I want to just like hear from her story of her background, and then all the things she tried. And yeah, just tell your story, go down whatever rabbit holes that are important to you. And then we'll kind of get into like what's going on today.
Yeah, for sure. It's so weird. Like, I feel like since I've told this story a few times, it's come out different every time. It's like interesting just to hear like how I feel like I've evolved and how I've learned things about myself throughout this process that like makes me explain it in different ways. But anyways, yeah, so I would say, I mean, growing up, like many of us, like I was an athlete my whole life from the time I can remember being alive. Like I was tumbling and like in gymnastics and in every sport I could think of. So I've always been super into fitness, and my passion for health and fitness early on was just very, it just came very naturally. So was very involved in sports. Kind of forced fast forward into high school. I was pretty involved in volleyball. That was sort of my main sport. I competed in swimming as well. So those were kind of like my two big sports. And then going into college, I didn't end up playing a college sport, but was still super into fitness. So I worked out so much in high school, like obviously for my sports teams, but also did a lot of stuff on the side. Came into college and was still very involved in like going to the gym every day when I was in college. And at this time, I mean, I still had a normal cycle. So I sort of identified as like I always felt looking back like I was a bigger girl in high school, and like many of us do now, I look back and I'm like, I wasn't a bigger girl. I was just
Not
athletic.
the tiniest one.
Yeah, I just wasn't the tiniest. Like I just had a build, and so it's just kind of funny. Like going into freshman year, I did put on some weight my freshman year of college, though, as many people do. And so I would never say that my body or like aesthetics was ever my number one concern. Like it was really once I found CrossFit, well, sort of my freshman year, but mostly my sophomore year of high school. I'm sorry, of college. That's when I really got into CrossFit, and it was never like chasing an aesthetic. I feel like that was a main driver for me, and sort of developing patterns around like eating and stress and exercise and stuff, but more so just my love for competition. Like if you just ask any of my friends, like I'm just always been, or my family have always been a competitive person. And that's in anything, like whether it's school, job, like athletics or anything. I've always been a competitive person, and not so much with other people, but more so myself. Like I just put a lot of pressure on myself. It was a lot of self-inflicted pressure. And I feel like that is sort of what drove, again, some of the development of the tendencies around eating and exercise and stress early on. So it was really my sophomore year, I found CrossFit and started officially doing CrossFit. And honestly, I fell into CrossFit in terms of my ability with it very naturally. Like I was a volleyball player, the type of training you do in CrossFit just came very naturally to me. And so pretty quickly I realized like, wow, I love this. Like I want to do this. And do it like at a competitive level. Cause I've known that you start to realize like, oh wow, this is a sport. People do this competitively. And obviously like I still had a long ways to go, but I would say in the beginning of that sophomore year into junior year, like I made a lot of gains early on, but it was in that pursuit of like wanting to compete and wanting to be like at a body weight that I would be competitive at and eat a diet that was going to help me perform. And it was like I got into, as a lot of people do in this sport, counting macros and I don't want to say dieting, but just like really taking a look at like the quality of food I was eating. And this is to say, like, I've always eaten healthy. Like I'm a dietitian. I study nutrition since the beginning of college, but it's just on a totally different level.
I
Sort of.
I actually like this. I don't think I've talked about this on the show before, and this is a good
Hmm.
point, right? It's
Yeah.
like we didn't all necessarily, I think most of us do go into training and nutrition with hoping to like lean out at some
Right.
degree, but many of us are very much focused on like performance, feeling good,
Hmm.
recovering quickly, and that's very common in the CrossFit space. And
Yes.
like you're saying, I think this is really relatable for a lot of people. You want to, you just like, when you start counting macros, you sort of just change the things you're eating
Hmm.
and how much of them you are. So for me,
Yeah.
prior, I was like, because I did the whole CrossFit thing too, and at when I was doing it, it was like all about paleo, and I think that was
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Like, yeah,
Like
yeah.
Whole
Like, no,
30.
for sure. Whole 30-ish palo. Yeah, for sure.
And so that was like I would have like chicken and eggs for breakfast. Like,
Right.
or like, dude, half a chicken and like roast vegetables at lunch. Like this is just, I know it was a lot of food. I hadn't quite like grasped the concept of like calories yet. So I
Right.
was just eating what I wanted and focusing on quality. And then when you discover macros, you're like, oh well, I'm not eating like chicken with skin on it and roast vegetables
Hmm.
anymore every day.
Exactly. Yeah. You just learn so much about what is in your food. Like, it is funny. Like, if you ask every person day off the street, yeah, they might know what sources of protein are or what carbohydrates are. But if you were to ask them, like, how many grams would you think this is, or how many grams of carbs do you think would be in this? And everyday people don't know that stuff. But once you start to count macros, like, you do start to know that stuff. And I don't want to like poo-poo counting macros entirely, because I truly believe, like, even with a lot of clients that I work with, there's a huge benefit, and there's definitely a place for learning what is in your food for certain people that need to understand what is in their food better. So I do think it can have a really important role. But as many with us, like, you sort of you just run a dangerous line when you get into counting macros. And um but yeah, so kind of getting down back into that conversation, like, I was just so focused on competing. And at that time, like, I had seen women in the sport of CrossFit that, like, at the competitive level, they did look a certain way. And when it comes down to it, whether you're an elite CrossFitter or not, you are aspiring to look like these elite athletes. And I think that's what's a little bit different in some other sports is, like, as a runner, you may be looking to have like a much like smaller figure, or like other sports, whereas in CrossFit, like, you want to look lean, like, you want to look really muscular and look like you can like fight a man, like that is, and not to be like
Yeah.
intense, but like, you want to look strong, like, it's highly praised. And so that's not a bad thing, like, that's awesome. I think it's so incredible that like so many young women are being inspired to have muscles and be strong and look healthy. That is amazing. It's just when um it can become, you can take desperate measures to try and achieve those things. And so I just really wanted to have the body that would allow me to compete at a high level. So I definitely went through, a traditional weight loss. And this is where you and I have very similar stories, just because, if you were to look at where my starting body weight was to where I ended up, and like that whole process of me losing my cycle, I didn't really lose like a ton of weight. I may have lost 10 pounds by the time that I actually lost my period. And it wasn't even that short of a time. Like, it may have been 2 or 3 months. And I was going through, a pretty healthy, well, I don't know if I would look back and say that it's healthy now, but just, it wouldn't be your traditional, oh, I lost 10 pounds in 1 month, or, 10 pounds in 2 months, where it could be more of a significant, shock to the body. It was everything that just started to build my whole life around. I started to get a lot of stress around training, around school, around getting to the gym, but also being a college student and being social, and like trying to balance all these things, that when it came to all of those things, in addition to looking back to now realizing it was a restrictive diet, just around how clean of food I was eating, and the pressure that I put on myself to, not go out to eat and not do certain things that you don't think is stressful, but it was so stressful to me. Um, and So yeah, I would kind of say that took me through like sophomore, junior year of college, even especially going into senior year. At that time, I still had been making like pretty significant gains, I would say, like in CrossFit, just in my skill and my strength. And that was really, really cool to see. Um, and then into like end of my junior year, going into my senior year is when, again, it kind of got taken to another level where our CrossFit gym had a pretty solid group of people that we were trying to compete um, to like earn a position to compete at regionals in CrossFit. And if you know CrossFit, I mean, they're not necessarily doing the regional competitions anymore, but I mean, that's a pretty big deal. Like as, competing on that level, no, it's not the CrossFit Games and it's not, that top level, but it's definitely getting there. And so I was training pretty hard, like, multiple hours a day, working as a student, working at a job on top of that, doing all these things. And at the time, like definitely looking back and not eating enough, it was not enough food for what I was doing. Was it 1,200 calories? Absolutely not. Was it maybe around 1,800 to 2,000? Probably. Maybe sometimes it was going above that, but just looking at the level of everything I was doing, it wasn't enough food. It wasn't at all.
And you're not a super short person either,
No,
which I know.
I'm 5'6".
Yeah, like your
Yeah,
average height. Yeah.
yeah, I'm 5'6". So, um, yeah, but it was really, getting into my senior year where I was working at the gym. I was training after that. I was probably riding on like 6 hours of sleep a night, maybe less. I was sleeping terribly. I was in a very rigorous nutrition program, studying to become a dietitian, trying to get good grades. Like just was balancing a lot of stuff. And I don't necessarily like regret some of these things. Like I've learned more reflecting back on some of these things now than now that I'm in this position. But it was a lot. It was a lot, and we could dive into like my whole transition into not striving to be a competitive CrossFitter anymore, and kind of where that's at now. But it kind of came to a point, I would say, I graduated. I competed at regionals. I graduated from college. I went to the University of Dayton, which is in Southern Ohio, and I moved home back to Cleveland to do my dietetic internship, which is the requirement that you have to do as a registered dietitian in training in order to be able to sit for the board exam. And so I came back to Cleveland. I got matched at a hospital in Cleveland, as well as a master's program. So I was doing a coordinated dietetic internship with a master's program. So that took me a year and a half from, towards the end of 2018 to the end of 2019. During that time, it was a different lifestyle in that, like, I wasn't training as much CrossFit. I wasn't working out as much, but the whole day to day was like identical, maybe even worse to what my senior year was, where I was at the hospital from, 8 to 4. I was commuting an hour. I was getting up at 5 a.m. to train at the gym, sometimes go back to the gym later at night because that was that's what made me feel good. That was my stress relief. But all these things were just continuing to compound in terms of the stress. And at this time, like I was already getting into the world of functional medicine. So I was, understanding of a lot of these principles in terms of like HPA axis dysregulation and the effects that, all these things can have on your body. And like I had been seeing doctors and gynecologists and all these things. And I think I knew for a long time at the root, like what it was. I just truly felt like I didn't have control over my situation, which I mean, I did. Looking back, like I did have control of it, but I just felt like, I got to get through this. Like, this is what I got to do. It was just like day to day, just get it done, get the work done, and kind of deal with it later. And I don't really know at what point it finally struck me at one point where I would say it was probably October of last year when I really started to like listen to more podcasts and read more things and read more research about like, okay, hypothalamic amenorrhea. Like, I definitely feel like this is kind of what might be going on. So I tried to really work on taking down the intensity, taking down the hours of training I was doing during the week, making sure I was eating a little bit more food. And I would say during that time, like I definitely made progress. You know, I started to feel like some more symptoms of having a period, and things were getting, I would say I was having some positive symptoms, but it got to the point where I just know my personality, and like I have an addictive personality. So like if I'm going to do something, like I do it 100%. It's hard for me to kind of do something happen. And
Is it
so yeah.
possible that that is why you had a hard time feeling like this wasn't in my control? Because while you're doing this whole
Mhm.
training hard and studying hard thing,
Mhm.
the option to like find balance with all of that is just
Yeah,
like another option.
non-option. Like you hit the nail on the head. It was like it was one or the other. I like to pride myself on being a person that can handle all things and do all things. But like looking back, it's like, what do I though? It's like, do I do that, or is it, or am I just telling myself that I am? Because really, it was very one-sided. Like it was very all or nothing in the terms of like, do all the things, get everything done, be stressed all the time. But it was like I wasn't doing the things that I should have been if I was, preaching balance and saying that I'm good at balancing things. Like yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate with like how I felt. And so that is something I'm totally new to. And like I truly feel like I'm at a point in my life where I have found I have disassociated from a lot of those like conditionings and patterns and feelings, that I can look objectively now and be like, whoa, that was not good. But
I know a question on your mind is, how long will recovery take me? And I know that because I get that question a lot. And it's tough because the timeline can be really unknown. And look, I can't give you a magic answer that's 100% accurate, but what I can do is ask you a whole lot of questions to understand things like what your lifestyle is, where your mindset's at, what have you already tried, what are you willing to try and not willing to try, and a lot more questions like that to determine a general range that you could expect. So I created a quiz to help get that answer to you because I was asking these types of questions to girls all the time. So I thought I'd make a quiz. And it's called How Long Might It Take to Get My Period Back? The quiz. So once you go through it and you answer the questions, it will give you not just a time range, but a quick description of how you might be feeling to help you connect with that answer and see it, make sure, yes, like this fits, this feels good for me. And don't worry, these ranges don't have to be set in stone at all. The goal is to allow you to look at the range that came based on your answers and decide, do I want to do this or do I want to speed this up? So once you get your range, you'll also get a few emails from me that week with some important tips that are specific to you to help you work through some of the roadblocks that could be slowing you down and in turn speed up your recovery time frame. So take the quiz now. Just head to quiz.thehasociety.com or find the link in the show notes and let's do this. That's quiz.thehasociety.com.
but yeah, so I just kind of fast forwarding though, it was still during, I graduated from my master's program. I started working in the job that I'm working now, which I absolutely love, and working alongside another dietitian. But again, it was a new job. It was working in private practice, which is not always the route that many starting out dietitians go. And it was a lot of pressure just in terms of like making sure that I was, still learning, like, and still researching and really getting on top of a lot of really important information that required of me because of like the role that I have, especially in the field of nutrition that I practice in. And so that was still it felt like a lot of stress. I started teaching a course, like I started teaching a college course at my school that I graduated from my master's from. So still lots of new. And just for time frame purposes, this was all like the beginning of this year still, so the beginning of 2020. And then I think just kind of coming off of all that, I finished the class that I was teaching at Case Western. I was getting a little bit more comfortable in my job. And then we start to hit, that we're in quarantine, start the end of quarantine. And, I don't know what exactly hit me, but I think it was finally maybe finding no period, now what? by Nicole Rinaldi, and like just immersing myself into that. And it was like, once I could see from like a scientific perspective, like this is what you have to do, it was like probably a week later. So I was all in. And so, yeah, that's I know that was kind of a lot. I hope I kind of hit the most important stuff, but yeah, so I mean, September 1 was legit the day I went all in, I would say. And here we are now, almost 3 months later. So,
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about the all-in process for you.
yeah,
Um, and throughout this whole time, you were seeing symptoms, right? You were like, you had cervical mucus happening,
yeah, yeah,
skin was reacting. Anything else?
for sure. So, I, and it's kind of weird. I think we talked about this before, but I actually had cervical mucus throughout even like the last year or two, I would say, of not having my period, just because I think my body was sort of like on its way. But yeah, I would say even since the beginning of September, it was really, I would say 3 to 4 weeks in, I was starting to get some pretty obvious symptoms. I was having cervical mucus. It wasn't necessarily in an exact pattern. It seemed like it was a little bit all over the place. Every couple of days, I was getting some different types, but it was something. I started getting breast tenderness, which even when I had my cycle years ago, I never had breast tenderness. So like that was very new to me.
I think
Um,
that was the case for me as well, I think.
yeah, it was so weird. And not even necessarily tenderness, but like sensitivity. It was like, yeah, like to touch, it was very sensitive. So I started getting that. I started even, feeling ovulatory pains and the twinging that many women talk about. Like I started to have a lot of those feelings, and I felt like things were moving, like things were going on down there. So that was encouraging. Like getting those signs and having those things happen is definitely encouraging. And it obviously, like the HA Society was such a groundbreaking like piece of my journey, just because you don't know until you connect with other women that are going through this. Like you feel so alone. You feel so alone in like your healing journey, and you feel like you're this anomaly and that your body is broken and that like you're just one in a million that are going through this, despite all the signs that would point to the direction that this isn't you, like this isn't your situation, this is not me. And then you connect with these other women that like, yeah, you might not be able to relate to every single one of their stories, but like some of them, like you'll find those one or two people that you're like, oh my gosh, like that is me. Like they'll say things and you're like, that is me.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
like we all think that we're the anomaly. So
exactly. Which is really ironic. It's
yeah.
ironic. Yeah, and so in terms of like the cervical mucus and the other symptoms like that, for me, and this is kind of a whole nother topic, but the skin issues have been something that have progressed for over a year now. And I know for a fact this is also some gut related issues that I'm still working through. And it's just ironic because this is a lot of the stuff that I work with a lot of my clients about is, certain, gut dysbiosis. And we look at functional lab testing to really identify some of these things. And that's sort of like another thing. But I do believe that part of the flare ups in acne that I really had was non existent for years is related to the hormones coming back, and definitely a part of it. But yeah, I would say that the symptoms were definitely there for what was it, maybe a month and over a good month, and then it was the end of the
Yeah.
2 months was when I got my first
You
period.
definitely were a bit weird. Like, so
Yeah.
we would get on a call every week, and it was kind of like had these lead up symptoms just for a longer period of time than the average person. We were like,
Yeah.
we talk about this a lot in general in the group. Like, if your boobs are sensitive or hurting,
Mhm.
your period is coming.
It is
Like,
coming.
I haven't seen it not happen yet. But it
Right.
definitely was like prolonged for you.
Yeah, it was very weird because I felt like, and this is where I had to totally detach from any expectation, because in the beginning, like you would read stories about women that maybe weren't as knee deep into HA as others, where they could get it back in 4 or 5 weeks. They up their calories, they totally cut the exercise out for a good 4 or 5 weeks, and boom,
Blow up.
yeah. And like I did that times 10. Like I was like sitting on my. I have always had a big appetite. Getting to 2,500 calories between 25 to 30 days. So I I'm obviously hoping, and as we speak right now, I'm kind of waiting for that third period, and I'm on like day 24 right now. So at first I was kind of upset about not having it right now, but I don't necessarily want a 24-day cycle. It's kind of like I
It's
want
so
it to be
frequent.
longer. What?
It's way too frequent as
Way,
well.
way too frequent. It's like, be careful what you wish for. So obviously anytime I'd be excited to get my period. Like I never thought I'd be so excited to get a period and have cramps and all these things. But yeah, so we should be, looking at this week, and I've had like good symptoms and signs. So just trying to be patient. But yeah.
With that second cycle,
Hmm.
because you would have had the most data in that one of any,
Right.
um, what did you notice?
So, I mean, that was the first time that I saw a clear ovulatory temperature spike. So, I had gotten the Daisy, which is a fertility tracker. I got it prior to getting my first period, and I kind of went back and forth with whether or not I actually wanted to track temperatures, just because before you get a period, it can kind of mess with your head, and it's going to be pretty inaccurate. But I was like, I'm just going to try. Like the 2 weeks leading up to my period, I did start to track my temperature just to see kind of what it did. And even before that first cycle, I didn't have a clear spike in my temperature. Even though I did feel like I had ovulatory signs, like I feel like I had some pain and like the breast tenderness and some other things like that, but I didn't see a clear temperature spike. But in that cycle from 1 to 2, I did, and that was really cool. It was like day 13, super on track, and yeah, that was kind of the biggest thing I noticed in terms of you definitely look back and see symptoms now. Just overall, how you feel is is different than how you felt without a period. So like, I mean, the typical things that you'll think of, like the coldness. I mean, I already started to feel a difference in just like my basal temperature during the day. Like I was always someone that was so cold all the time. I always had blankets wrapped around me, and so that's kind of been nice. Just having more, I feel like, thermoregulation, which is cool. What else? The big thing for me, so I've always had issues sleeping, and I know that that has been stress driven, and obviously with the hormone imbalance. And in the couple weeks leading up to my period, I actually slept soundly through the night, which is probably the first time I can remember that in years. Like I don't even remember the last time that happened. Even on a good night, I'll typically wake up one time to go to the bathroom, and and a good night, I'll get up, go to the bathroom, and go back to sleep without any issues. But I was sleeping through the night so soundly without waking up, which is actually interesting because a lot of women talk about how their sleep gets worse. Like I think you talked about that for
I know,
you, right?
all over the place. Yeah, yeah, that's so true. So when I was like an athlete, training a lot, under eating, I was sleeping. I would fall asleep pretty easily, and I would
Mhm.
stay asleep. And then I got my period back, and I just like will randomly wake up at 3 a.m.
Right.
Or I might be able to go back to sleep, or I might just be like, "Bing, time
Yeah.
to get
It's
up." So
wired.
yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's different. Everyone's so different.
Yeah. So since that though, like in between 1 and 2, I would say my sleep actually did start to get a little more weird, which was kind of annoying. So I was like, oh, this is helping my sleep. And then between 1 and 2, my sleep kind of went back to being a little more weird, but nowhere near the issues that I was having before, where like I'd wake up from 2 to 4 and I'd lay in bed for 2 hours, like just sitting there, unable to fall back asleep. And so that's definitely better. It's just usually like one time I'll get up. There'll be random days where I really struggle to fall back asleep. Like I might lay there for an hour, but that's pretty. Those days are, I can count on one hand now. Um, and so just generally though, overall sleep has really improved. In terms of my appetite, I know we've talked a little bit about this. Like in the beginning, when I was initially kind of diving into recovery, I did have a pretty big appetite, and that's even more than I had before. Like I've always been someone that kind of eats frequently all throughout the day. I don't usually go big breaks of time without eating, and I still continue to do that, but my meals were also bigger. So I would eat like a pretty dense breakfast and feel like pretty full. But then by 2.5, 3 hours later, like I would already be ready for a snack. And so I would have a snack, and then, hour
So weird.
yeah, and then like an hour or two later, like I'd be ready for a full lunch. And that definitely, as I got my first period and into my second, like that's definitely started to squash a little bit in terms of just how hungry I was. I was still eating a very big breakfast, like eating first thing in the morning, but I found myself not like thinking about food as often going into lunch. Like I might start to get hungry. You know, I usually eat lunch around like 11:30 or 12, but I would maybe find myself getting hungry around like 11 or a little before 11. Whereas before, if I had breakfast at 7, by 9 or 9:30, like I was already ready to get a snack. So that was kind of cool. Just I think obviously with the whole process and the changes physiologically and hormonally that are happening and with hunger signals and all that stuff, it definitely started to diminish a little bit, which is just nice when you don't feel like you're always thinking about eating and just always hungry. And by no means was I not honoring those things. Like if I felt hungry, I would go eat, but it just felt nice to be able to feel like it was a little more well managed. And
Mm-hmm.
so that has kind of been consistent, I would say, is like, you know, I ate breakfast at 7 o'clock today, and I did eat a little snack like before we got on, but I'll you know get to lunch and be ready to eat like a normal size lunch.
Yeah. So you know how you were, this just occurred to me, how you were more hungry during the
Hmm.
process. And you said you would eat big, dense meals and
Yeah,
then be like pumped for the next one.
yeah.
Would you also have more cravings in general?
So the craving things is kind of weird. To be honest, I've never been a person that's craved craved sugar or like craved chocolate.
Mm.
Even when I wasn't in recovery and I was, you know, not getting period and everything, I wasn't. I mean, I think part of it was just because like again, I'm a dietitian. I love eating healthy food. I will never not be that way. Like I will always want to eat healthy food, but I just was always eating healthy food that like honestly sugar and cake and cookies and stuff, it didn't appeal to me.
Yeah.
And once I started to be looser with those things and just eat more treats and kind of,
Mm.
you know, be a little more liberal with those things, obviously the cravings started to come a little bit more. Like I was craving more carbohydrates, and whereas before, like I would crave dense protein sources. And so that
Right.
changed in terms of cravings. Like in that first time before I got my first period, like I wasn't eating nearly as much protein as I did usually. You know, I usually
Mhm.
always had eggs in the morning and typically turkey or chicken or something for lunch. And I started just finding myself like I just wasn't craving like vegetables and meat nearly as much. It was
Yeah.
more like carb sources, which
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
So, but now since I've gotten back to having like a more regular cycle, like after my first and second period, I've started to crave those like wholer foods more. Like I want to eat big salads for lunch. Obviously, I throw potatoes and rice and make sure that I'm getting nice dense carbs in there, but I feel driven to eat a lot of those like colors and greens and things again, which really kind of
Yeah.
went away for a good like month or two. Um, but in terms of like cravings now, I really don't experience a lot of cravings. I know that might not be the norm with like as what other people would feel, but I don't. I mean, sometimes at night I'll be like, oh, I could go for some chocolate and I'll have some dark chocolate, but I wouldn't say it's a normal thing.
I agree with that. Like I definitely, especially now being pregnant, I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, I had no cravings before. Like
Yeah.
I would stare in the fridge like, what do I want?
Right.
Like
Right.
what do I want? And it was really easy for me to kind of just like say no to things at the grocery store just because like I don't need that, like it's
Right.
fine, I'll just
Yeah,
use this.
I would agree
But
with that.
now I'm like, I need everything and I
Yeah.
need it and it's a matter of life or death.
Oh my
So
god.
I like it's been it's another opportunity to look back at the whole AT recovery and the
Mhm.
whole um like tracking and dieting thing prior,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
it's a new perspective on cravings and what you wanted to eat. And because
Yeah.
I was like you, like these big fatty salads with
Yeah.
like apples in them and
Right.
raisins and like just delicious things, and now I'm like, no, like
No.
avocado and
Yeah.
toast with eggs
Yes.
and a side of cake.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And
Yes.
so that's why I was interested, because I was like, for a second, I was like, sounds like your experience coming in, like with your hormones ramping up and coming into recovery, it's like you kind of sounded pregnant.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
wanting to eat more of these foods as a reaction to like
Right. And
the
that's what does
nutrition that
make
your
me
body's calling for.
like reflect back and be like, you weren't you weren't honoring enough of those
Mhm,
cravings,
mhm.
even just for like carbs in general. I believe that was a big, like more of a problem for me. I know this is kind of different among women that are going through this, where fat might be the issue, like maybe just overall calories is the issue. I don't necessarily know, like it definitely was not fat for me. I was always really good about eating lots of healthy fat sources. I think it was more the carbohydrates for me. And not that I was
As a
ever,
CrossFitter too, like all of the
right.
macronutrients are important. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And especially if you're doing, I was used to when I was in the really competitive days where we were training for regionals, and it was more of that that phase of training. Like I definitely didn't compromise carbs there. I was eating a ton of carbs, but I don't know. Just I think transitioning off of that, I maybe subconsciously was just thinking like I'm not training as much. I'm not,
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
don't need like heaps and heaps of rice and sweet
It would
potato.
feel unjust for you
Yes,
to be
it
eating
yes.
like that on an off season. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so I would, just kind of if I was eating a big salad, or even if we were eating dinner, like I would still make potatoes, or I would still eat rice and stuff. It just wasn't in that big of quantities. And so I think that just also contributed to it, where I definitely think I needed to just get more carbohydrates in me. And that's why I started to really crave a lot of those sources.
Nice.
So yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, cool. So we got a period and then we got a 24-day cycle. And you didn't mention actually what cycle day was ovulation at that point? Like how long was your luteal phase in that 24-day
In
cycle?
the 24 day. So my ovulation was on day 13.
Oh, okay.
So it was a
Right
what,
in the middle.
11-day luteal phase?
Okay. Good. It's like
Yeah.
in that case, a short cycle generally sounds okay.
Mhm.
Um, whereas like my 24-day cycle, well, I cycled on like day 19.
Oh yeah,
So
so yours was really
yeah,
short.
yeah. So it's a really short luteal phase. There's so much to like
Right.
pick apart once you start cycling.
Mhm.
But I mean, yeah, like that sounds great.
Right.
Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, and the weird thing is that I didn't see an ovulation spike this month coming into my third one. So
Yeah.
that has not sat so well with me. And I'm expecting, and I'm almost hoping like maybe it is just an anovulatory cycle, because I know that that's very common. And just with my body working itself out, I think it's just doing that. It's working
Yeah.
itself out. And so,
And
yeah,
you
I'm
and
just,
I discussed last
hmm
week, like, okay, well, if we look back at this month, like what things changed? Because
yeah,
generally, so many of us do, we get our period back and we make some changes, even if we don't mean to.
hmm
Um, just it's pretty hard to like live your life consistently, always exactly the same.
right.
And it was interesting to look back at yours and feel like you really did continue doing all the
Yeah,
things, but you have acknowledged you have been less hungry.
yeah,
However, you still think you're eating enough. And there
hmm
has been a handful of times where you've had to do some physical exertion because you live in a snowy area and
right,
have friends that are moving house. And it seems crazy to be like, that can't be, I mean, that can't be it. Like,
right,
come on. Like, I'm shoveling my driveway. Like, I have to do these things. And I just like helped a friend move a house, and like it wasn't even that big a deal.
right.
But,
You
those
just
were the
don't
things that were
know. Yeah.
different.
Yeah, and that's what I almost am like. I wonder if just the psychological thinking around whether that could be the issue could be the problem, which is
Totally.
so freaking annoying. Because, like, you just have these thoughts like, am I really that sensitive? Like, is this going to be an issue forever? And I know that that's not the case, but it's just that. I know there's been a few times where I definitely have strained my body more than I have in the last 3 months in total, like in a matter of a week. And so for sure, like, was I running 10 miles or was I like throwing weights on a barbell? No, but I was definitely just like putting more stress on my body than I had, and not necessarily intentionally, but yeah, so I've just really made sure to take a step back, just anything I was doing unintentionally, to just kind of take a step back and make sure I'm doing everything I was doing the month or two before that, and making sure that I'm still continuing to eat enough. And that's something that, like, even though we all get to this point, I think, where it starts to become really challenging. Like, you don't want to have to like keep eating and keep eating and keep eating when you have reached a weight that like you got your period at. And you may even be at a weight, this is in my case, like heavier than I've ever been in my life. Like, even when like prior to when I went through a weight loss period, or like, before I really got into CrossFit. And so those things are challenging because it's like, you just don't, you just want you want to start, not necessarily trying to lose weight, but you just want to feel like you're at a place where you don't have to prioritize like gaining weight or eating a lot of food. And so, yeah, I think where I was going with that is just like, that can be hard, but nothing will ever keep me from doing that. Like, I have too much knowledge and too much commitment around like, I will refuse to have to do this again type of thing, that like nothing will ever prevent me from like doing what I have to do. I hope that makes sense. Like, it's,
like you're confident you'll never slip backwards into.
Yeah, like I might in my head be like, this is like kind of annoying. Like, I just want to start moving my body more, or I want to maybe not have to eat as much food. But like, that might be my thinking around it, but my decision will never follow suit. Like, I will always decide what I feel like is what I have to do to continue this recovery and to help make it happen the way it should.
What are the things that come into your mind when you think like, I know too much now, like this is never slipping backwards? Like, what is it that, keeps you going about getting a period back?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm also, for like on a daily basis, I'm analyzing labs. Like, I look at labs, I look at hormone testing. It's part of my job. And so when I'm able to just see from like a clinical perspective what is happening when a very stressed person, and this looks different for every single person, but literally what that does to hormone levels, like, and how that is going to directly it's going to directly impact the body. I guess just from like a 10,000 foot view, it's like, I know that the clinical data shows it. Like, you can try and suppress those feelings all you want. Like, I'm fine. Like, it's just one more thing, like just suppressing the stress. And that's what I did for so long, is just, just get through the day, or it doesn't matter that I didn't eat at this time in this break, or, XYZ, that you just squander those. They're just kind of excuses, and it's not necessarily your fault. It's just, you make excuses for why stress is okay, why you've been able to justify that you've had this stress in whatever way. And like, I guess just knowing that the data doesn't lie, like, that's one thing, like, just from a clinical scientific perspective, that keeps me going. And then just also with just knowing and learning more about your reproductive hormones. So like FSH and LH, we talk so much about estrogen and progesterone, and that these hormones are very responsible for regulating our period and giving us a cycle. But maybe it's not so much those problems, and it is a problem upstairs. Like, it's a problem at the level of these neuro signaling hormones. And just when I realized, like, just the level of mental and emotional stress that I was fighting on a daily basis, that was such a driver for why I had why I wasn't getting a period. Like, and I truly believe to this day, like, that was the main driver for me. Yes, I needed to be eating more. Yes, I needed to take down my exercise, but like, the impact that mental and emotional stress was having upstairs in terms of like those signaling hormones, it really makes me take a step back whenever I feel like things are starting to get out of whack, and I'm feeling anxiety and I'm feeling a lot of that, like, heaviness
Mm-hmm.
in my chest and in my body that is more of like that self-inflicted stress that is like put on me. It's like I have to, I'm like, okay, I got to take a step back, because again, it's like I know that this is causing this, and I know that's maybe not as easy for some people to like understand, but I guess it's just that kind of is like is able to drive me a lot. And yeah,
Yeah.
I'm able to tell myself that, there's a story after story of women that have to go backwards. They get where they want to get and they maybe try and go too soon. And I just think big picture, like, what is one more month? Or like, what is, like, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to change your life significantly. And that's even coming from me, who, like, I'm going through a year where I'm like planning a wedding and like all these types of things, where I try to just realize like there's a bigger plan. Like there's more to this than just like getting back to where you where you were before. Like it will never get to that point. It's not getting back to where you were before.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will. Like, that is how a lot of people want to be able to think about it.
Yeah.
And you are in the unique position where you have that knowledge to like help you
Mhm.
think about it in that way.
Right.
I have one more question for us.
Yeah.
And like, okay, what's something that's really scary for a lot of people is like, but I want to go back to competing for regionals
Mhm.
and stuff.
Mhm.
I want to get back into sport. I choose that. Um, like, what are the benefits to, like, what am I getting out of this, really, if it's taking that part of my life
Like
away from me?
away. Yeah.
Totally. So I'm wondering what your experience has been there. Like,
Yeah.
do you have a plan to go back to competing or to CrossFit? Like, did your relationship change? Something I remind people of is like, if this sport is truly for you, it will be there when you get
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
And through this process, if your desires change, you're not going to be as upset as you are
Yeah.
right now because you no longer have that desire. It can go a couple of ways. So what happened for you?
Yeah, I totally agree. It can go a couple of ways, and it's going to be totally different for every single person, because you hear these stories about some of these professional athletes that like they get back to running marathons or they get back to training. And I think number one, it's realizing what you're going to have to do differently, because the truth is, like, I know and have competed and worked out with elite CrossFitters, and they may not have the same issue that I am, and they're leaner and they're working out like more hours a day than I am. They're eating more than me. And like, again, every single person is different. So you cannot compare what you look like compared to someone else, or how much you're training compared to someone else, because genetics plays such a huge role here, and just your predisposition to handle stress differently. However, you just wonder if you had making different decisions around food, around the level of like pressure and stress, like could you, maybe what you were doing on a daily basis wouldn't impact you as much. So I believe that as long as you take the necessary time to like do this recovery due diligence and really start to reevaluate like what your motive is, I guess, then if you get through all of this and you've started to kind of realize things about yourself, just in terms of like why you may have been doing this, was it truly that you just wanted to compete and that you want to be in sport, or was it more so this
Mm,
aspiration to like an aesthetic or some idea of like what you felt like you should be doing, or what you felt like was just an identity for you, and like who would you be without this
I
part of
resonate
your
with that.
life? Yes, like I have 1000% gone through that. I'm still going through that. Like I am the person that like people look at me and they're like, Abby's the CrossFitter, like Abby is the dietitian, like Abby eats healthy, Abby works out, like, and I don't think that like the close people in my life have thought any differently of me. Like they still see me as me, and not this like identity that I think a lot of people have like made me out to be. And that's really hard to like just swallow sometimes and come to terms with. But I'm getting more and more comfortable with it every day, and just knowing that like yes, like I do believe that CrossFit, maybe definitely not to the level that like I was doing it, just because I just have bigger goals now and like bigger aspirations to do other things, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I don't have like as much space for that in my life, and just the mental and emotional energy that it took for me on a daily basis. And that's okay. Like, that is okay. But I know that it's going to be there. And I'm not even worried about like, um, I don't want to even say relapsing because that's a pretty heavy word, but going back down that rabbit hole, because I just know I feel very confident in like what my driver of that is going to be. And that is going to be to like live a very healthy life. And I'm always going to be a competitor. So if I end up doing a CrossFit competition down the road, or, competing with some friends, like it'll be there. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make sure my body's in a good place to do it. But like, it's going to be there for fun, and it's going to be there just because I want to do it, not because of this, again, this self-inflicted like pressure of like, this is my identity, and I'm no one but it. And yeah, I have such a passion around like helping more women than this, than just to not have to go through what I've had to go through. And I think that it's just so prevalent in sport in general, but like in the CrossFit space, and just like some of the conditioning and mentality around this lifestyle that you just, again, you kind of run this line of letting it dictate your life. And I want to help women not have to get to that point, and almost be on the more the preventative end. And so yeah, that was kind of a long-winded answer to
Oh,
your
good.
question, but I do think
You,
it's possible. I think you got to make the right decisions around it, but I think it's completely possible to like get back to a place where you're doing it in a really healthy, safe way, and like you're still able to push yourself hard. You're not going to push yourself hard maybe 5 days in a row, but like you're going to be able to still push yourself hard and get what you want out of it. It's just you're going to have to do things way differently.
you might get more out of it.
Yeah.
A
Oh,
lot of people will learn
oh
that
my
training
God.
less
Like,
can.
that is a
Mhm.
whole nother thing. And I will not go down a rabbit hole, but like,
Okay.
I realized in the last year or two, like you could ask any of my coaches or my friends that I was like competing with, that I was not seeing the gains strength wise, like competition wise, that I
Same.
should have been, based on the level of time commitment that I was putting into it from all ends. My, time in the gym, my nutrition, everything. And it just makes so much sense to me now. Like it makes so much sense to me now that I was physiologically not even in a place to see the type of success that I was striving for. Like my body
Mhm.
was not allowing it from me. And that gives
Totally.
me a little bit of peace too.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I know we're running out of time, but one
Yeah.
thing that you had mentioned that I loved too was like uh giving up that identity and kind of worrying how people are going to see you, but then learning that people just don't see you differently
Right.
necessarily. And I actually think for many of us, we worry, oh, how are people going to see us? Well, actually, when you take a step back and say, I'm making this change, this is what I'm doing because this is what's important to me,
Mhm.
that opens people's eyes up to the fact that you are so much more. They're not
Yeah.
saying, oh, she's not a CrossFitter, she's a blah blah. They're like, oh, she is an athlete, and
Yes.
there's more layers to her as a person, and what's important
Mhm.
to her, and what's going on with her, and just like what she's capable of. And I think that
Yeah.
we don't realize that what this experience does is gives us more.
Yes.
It does. Yeah, it gives
Oh,
us
I
more.
couldn't. No, I don't think you could have said it any better. It's like, you think you know what you want, you think you know what the long-term goal is or what you're striving for, and it's not bad to have those things. I just think it's, you close yourself off to so many other possibilities, or just um yeah, just really looking at, yeah, what more you have to offer, and like what you're capable of,
Yeah, I
for
love
sure.
it. Where can people come and chat with you? And people always reach out to guests after the show because they just
Yeah.
resonate so much with someone's specific story. So
Right.
where can people go find you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Instagram. So it's just at Abby_Vichill. Um, and again, the dietitian that I work alongside, we do a lot of general sports nutrition stuff. So that's at Forward Fuel. And we also have a scientifically research-based blog that I spend tons of time writing in. So that's forwardfuel.com. So those are like the big places. But yeah, I'm happy to connect with people on Instagram. I love that. So shoot me a DM or whatever. That would be the easiest way probably.
Thank you so much for listening today, guys. Please subscribe to the podcast, and if you could head to iTunes specifically and leave a rating or review, that would help so much because it makes it easier for other people with HA who are Googling around to find the podcast really easily. So if you do that, you're doing a service to all of the women.
From installing a smart garage door opener, to installing a bathroom faucet, to removing a tree, the Home Depot believes you can do anything, especially the things we have how-to guides for. Visit HomeDepot.com for thousands of tips, workshops, and ideas for projects, big and small. The Home Depot app, how doers get more done.